So I wanted to talk today about the power of emotional wisdom. Let me start by telling a little backstory to the music that we had today. We played Tracy Chapman's performance at the Grammys. I don't usually play pop art at the Grammys at a church service, but there's a reason I wanted to share that particular song, and it ties into the theme this week of emotional wisdom. So let me give you a little backstory. Within my family, we get together every year at the New Jersey Shore. We've been doing it for, I don't know, 50 years, more. And it's just great. And now there's like 30 of us plus, and we all catch up. And it's just a fun way to stay in touch. And one thing that has happened for me in that process is I get to catch up on various parts of pop culture that I would not know about from my nephews and nieces. 20 years ago, I learned about this thing called American Idol, for example. I had never heard of American Idol. So then I get brought up to speed. In the last few years, I've learned about The Bachelor. I had never heard of The Bachelor before. So I'm up to speed on The Bachelor. But last summer, we were sitting on the beach, and my nieces in particular were laying in the towels next to me, and they were singing this Tracy Chapman song, Fast Car, word by word. And it just, what? Tracy Chapman was definitely a singer from my generation. How did my nieces know the exact words to the lyrics of a song that hit the top of the charts in 1988? And that song was very iconic for me. So I went to graduate school at Harvard Divinity School, and I used to walk into the Harvard Coop in my first year. And I walked past an African-American woman playing her guitar. In retrospect, that was Tracy Chapman. She was at Tufts at the same time, and she would go and make a little money playing at the Harvard Coop. And 3 years later, that singer would become a rock star. She won her first Grammy for that song, Fast Car. And I had just gotten a convertible car, and I just played that whole album and that tape over and over and over again. And what did I love about it? It hit every emotion for me. It was about hope. It was about sadness. It was about frustration. It was about escape. It was about joy. And it was about belonging. You add that to her powerful voice, and it was just incredible. So it's an incredible song that really taps into our emotions. How did my nieces find out about this gem? You may know. Luke Holmes, a country singer who was born a year after Tracy won the Grammys in 1988, is a country western sensation who I'd never heard of. And he had redone the song, and it was the top of the charts. So I learned about Luke Holmes and him singing Fast Car, and the two of them sang it at the Grammys last week. I don't like award shows. They have no interest in me. There's a lot of narcissism and ego and so forth, and I'm just not up on the tunes, so I don't even know the songs or whatever. But thankfully, Annabelle posted it on Facebook, and okay, Tracy Chapman, I got to pay attention to that. So at the Grammys, this icon, who is now 59 years old, performed with this country singer who's, and I think she sang better than she did 23 years ago, but she just beamed with joy as she sang it. And again, it hit me with emotions at a different way, in that it was inclusive. She's African-American, she's lesbian, he's straight white guy, she's older, he's younger, they're complimenting each other. He's country, she's folk, and he's more, red state, she's more blue state. And for all those reasons, and the fact that song's emotions could travel through the generations, I was very touched by it. So I've watched it over and over again. And it occurred to me there's such a power in the arts and in music that can hit us emotionally. And somebody like me, who spends most of his time in his head, loves to read, loves to think, it's really great to have an experience of just tapping into your emotions and feeling it. And I really thank the two of them for that. Now, that song might not be the song that taps into it for you, but the arts and music have a unique way of touching our emotions, and something we can really tap more into. This last week, Malcolm sent me a clip of Mahler, and I would say, if I'm guessing Malcolm, that Mahler piece on the resurrection does that for you too, hits you at a very emotional level. And so I played that over and over again. Malcolm's nodding, so I guess it does. So there's something about the arts that can tap into this emotion, and we need to find ways to tap in. Emotion has been largely something we've ignored in our culture, and there's a real wisdom in our emotions. So This week, I want to talk about the wisdom of our emotions, and I've been doing this conscious leadership steps, so we're on step number 3, lesson number 3, the commitment. I'll read the commitment this week. I commit to feeling my feelings all the way through to completion. They come, I locate them in my body, and then I move, breathe, and vocalize them so they release all the way through. So we're all aware of the wisdom that we get through our heads, but we're a lot less aware of emotional wisdom. Much of the insights that have come about emotional intelligence have really happened over the last 20 years. Though Swedenborg, as we saw in the readings today, was talking about the power of the heart and the heart versus the head as far as spiritual energy communicating to us well over 200 years ago. But it's really become a thing. Emotional intelligence, with a book written on that topic in 1993, kind of broke open, oh, there's this whole emotional thing. Before that, we pretty much saw wisdom or intelligence as something just came through the mind. And we actually saw emotions and feelings as something to be sort of repressed and kind of like touchy-feely, to be ignored. And so this, that is, and we've missed a lot of the wisdom that can come through our bodies. When tapped into properly, our emotions are very powerful sources of wisdom. Okay? And instead, we often repress them, we recycle them, and when we do that, we just keep repeating them in our life. We put it on a repeat cycle, so we don't process it. So they will find a way, they're telling us something, and when we ignore them, it's a little bit like the example I love is trying to take a beach ball and pushing it under the water. It takes a lot of energy, it's exhausting, eventually it pops up. So that's kind of what we're doing when we're putting our feelings and we're pushing them down. And a lot of us, frankly, our culture has kind of told us to do that, to suppress your emotions, ignore them, don't be silly. And spiritually, as a spiritual guide, I think that it's critical for us to tap into this sort of feedback that we can get through our emotions. Now, the experts in this field of emotional intelligence, they'll debate whether there's 4 key emotions or 6 key emotions. And they describe these key emotions as sort of primary colors, that all the other emotions we have come from these 4. I'm going to focus on 4 today, emotions that most people in this field sort of agree would be the key 4. There's some debate about which others could be added, but fear, sadness, joy, and anger are the top 4. And these, knowing that when we feel something and we can say to ourselves, what am I feeling? And tap into one of those 4, and it's usually sometimes a combination of those, we can actually get wisdom. We can get feedback, immediate feedback into ourselves that I would say we're getting spiritual feedback as well. This is spiritual intelligence when we're paying attention to what our body is saying. So how do these play out? Well, what's the wisdom of sadness? Sadness sounds like something we want to avoid at all costs. But sadness, healthy sadness, teaches us that something needs to be let go or moved on in our life. And people who can't process sadness hang on to old ideas, they hang on to old people they should let go of, they hold on to old projects long after they're healthy, but they'll just keep hanging on to it because they have not processed the sadness of the loss. In the church world, people hang on to old buildings, they hang on to old liturgies, they hang on to old rules that no longer are appropriate, but there's a sadness that they can't let go. Now, people who do not process their sadness eventually get into a victim mentality. And they look at everything in the world as coming at them and bad things. They're not responsible for it, but things that are coming at them. Eventually, they get into a blame game. So if you find yourself always blaming people or events, there's likely some sadness that needs to be processed. So that's sadness. How about fear? Again, do we want to feel fear? Maybe watch a horror movie, but just for a few minutes, but not really. But fear also is very healthy. Fear warns us that something in our life needs to be known. You can just think of the example of like when you step off a curb and a bicycle or a car is coming at you here in DC. It's a chronic problem. But the fear is just wake up. This is not good. There's an alarm. It's an alarm system. So fear does that in our life. When we have that alarm system, it can make a huge difference. But when we don't process fear in a healthy way, we focus on future states instead. So what we do is we start to think about a good example is someone who's sitting in bed, just had a good meal, but is imagining, if this, and this happens, I'll be homeless, hungry, and destitute. So they're imagining, and that leads to anxiety. That's where anxiety comes from. We get paralyzed by our fears, and we turn them into possibilities that are usually terrible, and those possibilities get us so anxious that we're not even able to deal with the present. So if you find yourself always anxious about things that are going to happen in the future that may never happen at all, you probably have some fear that you have not yet processed. It's trying to teach you something. How about anger? Can anger teach us anything? Well, healthy anger teaches us that something's no longer of service. Something also might not be aligned in our life when we have anger. When we don't develop healthy anger in our life, we have a really hard time setting boundaries. We don't process our emotions around anger, then we begin to blame others, we become very self-righteous, and we become very critical. So if you find yourself always criticizing other people and blaming other people and just always in that state of criticism, there's probably some anger underneath that you have not processed. How about joy? Okay, everybody wants joy. Healthy joy, believe it or not, joy is one of the emotions that we've really been taught to ignore. It seems sort of worthless. But healthy joy tells us something needs to be celebrated, appreciated, or laughed at. Many of us are taught that we shouldn't celebrate, we shouldn't waste our time, just get to the next project, get to the next thing. I just had a real victory this last week in getting funding for the project I have been talking about, and I got a commitment, and I went out that night and celebrated. We've just got to say, yes, that's great. Otherwise, we just plod in drudgery. Everything is just constantly the next project, and we get exhausted when we don't take time to celebrate, and we don't have any joy, no fun. So healthy joy is, when you can really develop it, is a great resilience builder because it's consistent through circumstances. Happiness is different from joy. Happiness is temporal. It's just for the moment. We're happy because of the circumstances. But if the circumstances change, we're not happy anymore. But joy exists even when we're in challenging times. So if you haven't had a good laugh lately, you probably should have some joy. You find a way to get some joy processed. You probably haven't processed it. So when we reject our emotions, we reject those teachings, and we end up recycling them again and again, pushing them down, and they just keep coming back up. And it takes a lot of energy to repress them. That's wasted. Interestingly, Jesus, we who are Christians believe Jesus is God on earth, and he comes to earth, so we would think that he wouldn't have to deal with all these, but he did. It's so fascinating in each of the readings that Jesus went through the whole panoply, the whole spectrum of emotions. He taught us about anger when he flipped the tables in the temple. It's dramatic. A lot of people want to ignore that about Jesus. He flipped tables in a temple. He was furious. So he let his anger out. When he wept, when his friend died, the shortest verse in the Bible. And also, he taught us about sorrow, too. He's sitting in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows he's going to be arrested. He knows he's going to be humiliated. He's going to be tortured, executed. And he says, my soul is consumed with sorrow. There's no denying it. Sometimes things are very sad, and we just have to just go into them and acknowledge them. And then, of course, Jesus taught us the power of joy in the final verse that we read this week, where he says, when you love one another, and I love you, you love me, I really want that. When you do that, your joy will be complete. That your joy in life comes from loving others and being useful and caring and serving humanity. That's the message. That's Jesus' message, and that's the path to joy. So despite Jesus modeling this, the Christian religion has often been emotionless. It's interesting to me that some of the churches that are growing the fastest are like Pentecostal churches. Whatever you know about Pentecostal churches, they're an emotional experience. They tap into the whole part but very much into the emotion. I think people are craving something that it taps into. Swedenborgians tend to be even worse, quite frankly, because we can often get trapped in our heads. And you'll get with Swedenborgians, they'll be quoting Swedenborg back and forth and his writings, but there's no emotion, there's no connection. That we can get lost in the facts and miss out on the feelings. And it's not just Christianity, really. Much of our modern culture mocks feelings as soft. And even when you're talking about them in businesses, they call them soft skills as opposed to hard skills. It's sort of like there's something weak about them. One conflict entrepreneur who has a television or an online show tells his counterparts, facts don't care about your feelings. So we have this kind of artificial debate that you can either have facts or feelings. We can have both. They're both sources of knowledge that can inform us. The facts we can learn, we can study. But if we're ignoring feelings, which most of us do, we're missing out on this whole other form of wisdom. So great spiritual leaders, when you meet them, they really do know how to tap into their feelings and work them through their body. They pay attention to what's coming in, and they just state, I feel this, and they let it work through. A few weeks ago, I was speaking to a leader of a large organization. She had experienced the death of her partner and her parent in just the last few years. And she was calling to get strategic advice for her organization. And it was more like a coaching strategy call. She was throwing budget numbers at me and spreadsheets and plans. And then when I got a chance to ask a question, I just said, how are you feeling? She paused for a second and she said, oh, good. I'd just like to know how you're really feeling. And then she just said, I'm tired. I'm just really exhausted. Like, I just want to stop everything. So she explained that it was very hard for her to admit her feelings. She had learned to override her emotions to get where she was in the business world. And then when we kind of went underneath what the feelings were, this kind of tired, she talked about the fact that she was very sad for all the obvious reasons. She had lost two important people in her life, and she was angry, particularly about losing her spouse at a young age, unexpected. So she was pissed. And so she just talked about that for a little bit. So we do have to tap into these emotions and stop ignoring them and repressing them, or they'll just recycle. And it will not make us successful in achieving the goals that we want to achieve. Emotions are often described as energy in motion in our body. They give us wisdom, but they also need to move through our bodies. So as we discussed, we can look at how do you let your emotions pass through? This is an area that is definitely a learning edge for me. And so I preach this. I don't say I'm particularly good at it, but really people who are good at doing this will, when they feel an emotion, they'll just process it. One reason I had that reading about breathing is a great way to work it through. If we could learn to use our breath more. Because you know that when you do get angry, or you do get sad, or you get fearful, a lot of times you find yourself holding your breath. So just breathing can reset the body, and that's a way we can process our emotions and let them move through. Other people will shout, growl. That doesn't seem so natural for me, quite frankly. I don't see myself doing that. Maybe it's just an edge I haven't really gotten in touch with. But when I was talking to this friend of mine, we were looking how she could process it, and she loved to run. Exercise was a way that she processed things through her body, and that makes sense because it's breathing, exercise. So exercise and breathing is another really great way to process emotions if we think about it. By the end of that call, by the way, she agreed that the organizational strategy was important, but it would be a lot better informed if she could process her feelings. And she just said finally at the end of the call, she's like, I don't need to solve everything. I can just do this step by step and just start with saying what I'm feeling. And I feel relieved just saying that. And I could hear it in her voice. There was a sense of calm and peace and joy just going through that process. So if you're like me, I would say emotional wisdom is not all that natural. It's hard for me to name what emotions I'm feeling or where they are in my body. But something I'm working on and paying attention to. But some leaders who have really done the work on this can experience it right away. I noticed a few weeks ago in a Sunday service, in reacting to the sermon discussion, Roxanne Sperry, our own Roxanne, said, "I'm feeling this in my neck." And a light bulb went off for me. She is someone who, as a chaplain, who has worked in very high intense emotional settings, has learned to tap into her feelings and the fact that her feelings show up in her body. And she could just immediately not only place the feeling, because we talked further about how she felt, but she acknowledged it first as a body part. And those who are experts in this field of feelings can actually help us pinpoint what feeling we're feeling depending on what we're feeling in our body. So if you're feeling pressure in your jaws and in your shoulders all the time, that's usually the place where anger is sitting. So that might be what you're not dealing with. If you're feeling tightness in your throat or your chest or your eyes, very often that's where sadness sits. If you feel a tingling up and down your spine, that's usually where joy vibrates. Feeling something in your gut, well, that's often where our fear sits and warns us. So this week, I encourage all of us to just experiment with your emotional wisdom. What are your emotions right now trying to teach you? You could just simply ask yourself, this week sometime, what am I feeling? Where is it located in my body? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling anger, joy? Am I afraid? You don't immediately analyze it because you'll get back into your head. Just say, okay, that's what I'm feeling. After some time, you can kind of work on it and process it. Maybe you can let it roll through you like water by breathing or exercise or yelling or whatever your best way to get it through. But acknowledging that it's there, it's trying to tell you something. And if it's a persistent thing that you've ignored for a long time and recycled, you may be used to it by now. It may be a habit, and it'd be helpful to break it because it's not being processed. When we fail to process our emotions over a long period of time, they take a toll on us. When we repress them, we'll find ways to ignore those feelings, and we find ways to numb ourselves. That can be through, for example, drinking alcohol, getting high, vaping, sexual addiction, other addictions, or even just going down rabbit holes in your head, in your mind about scenarios, this. Those are all ways of not processing our feelings, our emotions. So by listening to what our body and emotions are telling us, we can allow them to move through and we can deeply feel. So how does this all impact Church of the Holy City? What can we learn? Well, as a community, we can learn better to tap into our emotions and really feel for one another. In other words, particularly when we have our discussions, there's one thing that speakers have acknowledged to me after. They go, wow, I really like your discussions because nobody started arguing points across each other. Everybody just listened to what people said. And that's something beautiful that we've cultivated here. We really need to keep that going. People are not looking for a debate partner on Sundays at 5 o'clock. They're looking to say, hey, this is just how I feel, or this is how I see it. And as we all know, it doesn't matter what agrees or disagrees. We don't debate it. It's just what you feel. But church life today has a lot of feelings that need to be played out. There's lower attendance, there's financial stress, there's should we sell buildings? There's all kinds of feelings in church right now. And there's also joy that we're building community. And every so often, one of you over a dinner or an email will say, this week, this got me through this. And that just gives me joy. So there's joy too. We just began today's service with some joy in the story of Jason and Dennis, a boy rescued, and it is a miracle. We have to say it's a miracle how that kid went from orphanage in Ukraine, captured by Moscow, in a Russian uniform on camera, talking about how great Russia was, and now is in Warsaw. So that's joy. We should celebrate that, and we should celebrate Jason's work. Jason played a role in building it. So when we have that, we can celebrate it as a community. Now, back to Fast Car, Tracy Chapman. Yes, I like the song. There's a great line at the end, and I think this is really where church could be, play a role. Because the song is about two people singing to each other, and the refrain is, and I had a feeling that I belonged. I had a feeling I could be someone, be someone, be someone. This is what people want. People are craving a place to belong. Church has forfeited that for the most part. We have not been perceived as a place where people can just be whoever they are and just belong and be someone. You are someone when you come to this space. So let us make this community of people a place where there's emotional wisdom and it creates a feeling of belonging, and everyone can feel that they can be someone. Amen.